Welcome back to Vancouver Bass Players. My name is Laurence Mollerup, and today I'm going to be interviewing Mike Young. Hi, Mike.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Mike is the bass player for Mother Mother and for Jojo Mason, and he does a ton of session work. He's actually a producer, and he writes and scores films and does a lot of work in his studio at home as well. So today we're going to talk about gear, and Mike's got a lesson for me right off the bat. So let's get to it.
Yeah, we were sort of talking before about extended techniques, um, like the ridiculous things that people say, like you're never going to use that in a session. You're never going to use that on a gig. Like there's no reason you should know how to tap like that unless you're in a prog metal band. But I've just found that for myself and in talking with like really great players that I play with, keyboard players, drummers, whoever, the more you know, the better your techniques are overall on the instrument. The more you just inherently understand the simple things, the easier those little things are.
Yeah, so like knowledge is power, right? And when you can do a lot of different things, you never
And
know when you're going to use it.
that little thing sometimes, like, most of the time you're not going to do something fancy, but sometimes you want to do a little, I heard that on, I think it was a Pearl Jam record a million years ago. That's so dope. What is that? And I just heard him bend the note half above.
Yeah, I heard Marcus Miller do that one, and I couldn't believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that one was particularly like 12, tap 14 when it's bent. Like
Yeah.
saucy. Like,
It's so vocal when you get that band in there. It gives it that blues quality, right?
and I think that a lot of those extended techniques and it can end up sounding very vocal, which is like
Yeah.
recording, like something like that. It can be very beautiful in a bridge and something that's a little down. So
Yeah.
I'll often do something like that, like a nine and a third on top. And then for me, what I like to do is I actually like to emulate other instruments with that type of technique. Those types of
Yeah,
tricks,
for sure.
they sound very beautiful and they can work really well in a spot that you might not expect.
Right on. Yeah,
And
you were
then
saying beforehand about how you were using things like playing, harmonics on a country session the other day.
yeah, um, I was actually sort of just screwing around. I remember hearing Portrait of Tracy as a kid
Yeah.
and just losing my mind, not like needing to know exactly what that was, how to do that. And then hearing a number of other bass players do the same thing. Actually, Jeff Clement from Pearl Jam, uh, same thing. I was a huge fan of them back in the day. Lots of harmonic work. Those kind of motions. So yeah, I was just playing on top of this country change, and the producer kind of just lost his mind. He's like, I don't know what you're doing, but I love it. Well, like, let's track that in the session.
I think sometimes we make assumptions around the bass roll, and we sort of might go into those sessions going, well, I better stay in this sort of conservative mindset. And producers are actually looking to be surprised, right?
Yeah, I think in a lot of kinds of music, in rock these days for sure, in country, in a lot of pop, there's sort of the standard thing that the bass does. It fills that role, and a lot of time that's appropriate. But yeah, like people want to be surprised. They want to, what is that? What am I hearing? Oh, that's a really unique thing. Like, and if you know a little bit, even if you know a little bit about playing, and you hear someone do something really cool, I think it's really intriguing for even the average listener. Is that the
Yeah.
bass doing that? That's really dope. I really like it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like when I heard it, I thought it was a Rhodes because it sounded like a Rhodes piano, and of course back when I heard it, there was no video of Jocko doing it,
Totally.
and then the hard part was that um,
Oh, that
E sharp.
yeah, gnarly, dude. His hands were so big, like,
Yeah,
uh, yeah, just and on a fretless to keep that all in tune. And, yeah. ridiculous. But
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
that same country session, I actually ended up doing what I call like the fake octave pedal. Uh, Essentially, if you play a C, for example, you actually finger uh, up above it on the octave above on the C, and it stops the first harmonic in the note from happening. So instead of the full punchy sound, you get a really subby low octave. So if you play, you can create like a fake 808 sort of sound. And it sits in a track totally differently than playing standardly would.
Wow, that when you first did that, I almost thought you had an octaver pedal on, like one of those
It's,
Boss
it's
octavers.
it's really deceiving. I actually use an octave pedal a lot, especially with Mother Mother. I'm really pedal heavy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that one is really unique because it does sound all of a sudden like you've put something on it, but it's literally playing the octave above, so it stops that first harmonic from occurring in the note itself.
That reminds me of one of my favorites as well. Is this thing of you play
Totally.
and you get like EQ. It's like somebody boosted your bass EQ.
Just muting it a little bit at the front there. Yeah.
It's that Rocco Prestia thing, right? You know.
One of my first teachers gave me a Tower Power record, Back to Oakland.
Oh, I love that record.
I do too. Yeah, it's awesome. I think I was like maybe 13.
Who were your teachers? Sorry, Mike, I interrupted you. That's the way Zoom works.
Yeah.
Who did you study with early on?
I went initially when I was a kid. I played classical piano. My mom was very specific about both my brothers and myself learning classical piano. So did that and sort of like didn't love it. Wasn't really connected to the music, but picked up a bass and was like, oh, this is the thing. All this music like makes sense on this instrument for me.
Nice.
And then I just we went to the local music store. My mom was just like, well, sign you up with this guy. His name is Wayne. He played in his dad's big band. He'd fill in on any instrument if they needed to. Like he could play sax, he could play guitar. He just was a crushing musician and loved all of this funk music and like jazz and soul. So he gave me P-Funk records, and he gave me Power, and he gave me my first Weather Report record. And so he was hugely instrumental in starting me off with a lot of the kinds of music that I still love, like bass players, really, really great players. Hearing Rocco for the first time is like, it's like a religious experience. It's crazy. Like, who is this man? How is he doing that?
Yeah, I got to see him play at P&E a few years ago now with Garibaldi.
Okay. Oh, dope.
Dream Team, right? And Rocco, it's that right hand, right? It just comes down to all the magic tricks in the right hand.
16ths, just that constant, the dead notes and everything. It's wonderful. I really like that. Just that sense of syncopation was really intriguing to me as a kid, especially after hearing rock music and grunge music when I grew up in the 90s. That stuff's great and really intrigued me and led me down a really great path, I feel. But hearing like funk for the first time, that syncopation and the one being so strong, I was just like, okay, there's something here that I really love. It's the connective.
Awesome.
So yeah, he was great. I went to him for quite a while. I started asking him to teach me how to play the Primus lines and stuff like that. And he was like, it's not really my bag. I think you might need to like move forward with something else. So I actually started going to a guitar teacher after that. And he sort of taught me a little more about playing with other people and harmony. And he gave me some really interesting records like the Dream Theater, my first Dream Theater record. So, I'm 14 listening to that, blowing my mind again. I got really into progressive music and heavy playing. Sort of led me down the metal path, which I ended up playing a lot of. So.
That's really cool. Do you find one thing about metal that I find really interesting is the detunings, and usually the guitars are where people detune, and bass player usually plays a 5-string, but it's now, you know, where there are a lot of tunings happening for bass, lots of extra low tunings with, you know, low A on the bottom. Have you messed around with some of that stuff as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I played with Devin Townsend for a number of years,
Okay.
and he's an open C tuning. So on a six-string guitar, from bottom to top, C, G, C, G, C, E. And then he started using seven-string guitars. So he would tune the low B down to a G, just like, that's my territory. So what I ended up doing was doing the same thing on the bass. I ended up tuning G, C, G, C, G. So completely open C, throws all your moves out the window. None of your licks that you've spent years working work anymore. Like they're it's kind of crazy. Um, but you know, the role a lot of the time in metal is to almost be another guitar.
Yep.
It depends on the band, of course. A lot of the time, you know, you're a really groovy bass player, or you know, you're Robert Trujillo, or a lot of the time you're doing very extended techniques. You're doing a lot of tapping, those kinds of things. But with Dev, it's all about being huge, copying the riff, providing like the low end below what the guitars were doing, and then getting gnarly when he wanted to do. Like, I think the bass should do this tapping riff too. Oh, okay. And it wouldn't work in a standard tuning because of the way it would be phrased.
Yeah, you could learn the fingering by, you know, following the guitar fingering, right? And I think those open strings have a different sound as well, you know.
I know that from upright players that I've talked to, uh, tuning to fifths actually increases the volume of the instrument,
Yeah.
because the sympathetic harmonics created by that fifth tuning actually essentially turns your volume up. So
Yeah, I interviewed Meighan Williams, who's a stand partner of mine from the opera orchestra, and she's also principal bass up in Kelowna. And she's got a piece she's working on now where the top string is a solo tune. So she's got an A on top, and
okay.
then the middle two strings are down a semitone, so F sharp, C sharp, and then her low C extension on the bottom.
Oh
So
wow.
tuning is like, right?
Oh wow.
That's the scordatura that she's dealing with on this new piece. And so it's funny, the same conversations in the string bass world and the electric bass world,
Yeah.
in tunings and extended techniques. We're still in this kind of renaissance of the bass that I think players like Jocko and Stanley Clark brought along, you know, in the mid 70s, early 70s. I think we're still in this process of what the instrument can do and what the role is, and, you know, how traditional versus how advanced you can play.
Yeah. And that's sort of what we were talking about at the beginning. It's like
Yeah.
that traditional stuff's really important. Like I've always felt that. It's funny. My first teacher made me just think of this. He said to me once, "There's no money above the seventh fret."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, I don't totally think that's true, but I get the point. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of the time, your role is to like pocket eighths. That's what the song calls for. You know, everything, all the other harmony that is taken care of. Vocals, it's just groove your ass off.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's just not it. Sometimes there's room for you to be intriguing and use those extended techniques and tap and make these really interesting sounds that the bass will do.
You know, you just made me think of what that's all about. I think it comes down to a selflessness of serving the song, right? That's an easy one.
Yeah.
Versus the sort of like stay in your lane thing about, you know, you're a bass player, you got to play low and simple. Like, I think it's really about, you know, I actually enjoy playing bass. That's why I do this thing. But I also have something to say as well. So it's finding that play of how much to say and how much not. You know, I think with young players especially, it often comes off kind of prescriptive. You must do this to play bass. And it's really more about, hey, learn to enjoy what it feels like to play in the pocket when everybody disappears.
Yeah, totally. As a young player, I was sort of the opposite. I always played a six string. I did a lot of upper chordal stuff and tapping. I always wanted to have like my voice, my sound on every song that I did.
Yeah.
And once I started doing sessions, I realized, oh, okay, that's not what this is. You can do that in your own music. You can do that in a session sometimes if it's called for.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're playing progressive music or something, or like some really gnarly fusion jazz, yeah, do some crazy stuff. But Yeah, when it's pocket, I actually did a session yesterday, and it was very throwback 70s. I was playing Hofner, and the P bass. Everything's passive. It was all like almost like the band or the Eagles or something like that. And it was just about pocket. The drummer was just sitting in pocket, and so I was just sitting with him, and everything ended up feeling so good. There was no need to do anything else. It didn't call for it.
Yeah, and so you mentioned they're playing a couple other instruments as well, and maybe that's a chance for us to segue to what gear do you find yourself using most regularly? I know when I saw you in Stanley Park last summer, you were playing that black Sadowski, and it just sounded fantastic.
Yeah, I have that up on the wall back there. That's with Mother. I use that most. I
Right.
find it's got a bite to it. It's the what they call modern 24. So 24 frets, the soap bar pickups. Um, it's got the maple neck. It's just bright, and there's like a mid-range quality to it, 800 hertz or something. It's just like present. I find it cuts through the mix beautifully, especially when I'm doing pick stuff. I wasn't initially one of those guys who was, I'm never going to use a pick on a bass. That's wrong. That when you buy the Ebo, it comes with the no picks button. I had it on my backpack, no picks. Now I find myself using it quite a bit, especially with Mother, something like Oh My Heart.
That's interesting as well, because I was anti-pick for the longest time, and I didn't take my own advice, which is be broad, do everything, right? Play French bow and German bow, and learn all the things. But I had a snobbery around the pick for a while, and I think it's been about 10 years now, and I'm pretty comfortable. I don't have one sitting on my desk like I clean my desk, darn it. The thing I learned was to hold the pick differently, and that really changed my world. Was I don't hold it on the tip. I have actually the curve part, and I found I like the sound better.
Oh, okay.
So it's one of those things where you got to play with all the parameters, right?
I played around with them a bunch. With Dev, I used to pick quite a bit. Just the sound for metal. Number of projects that I did after that. One with Dev's old drummer, Ryan. We did this thing called Terror Syndrome. It's just heavy thrash. Baritone guitars and drop A, like just gnarly, and it was all pick. It was all just playing as hard as you could, just chaos, distorted tone, like craziness, and it just called for that attack, that grindy, sort of scraping sideways across the string attack. Whereas yesterday when I was playing a Hofner, it was much more about that like old school sort of plunky tone, playing a little further towards the fretboard. That kind of vibe, and it just like it's perfect. It sat perfectly in the track, whereas that other style sits perfectly in the metal track. It's really interesting once you figure out that has a lot of voice as well as these.
Yeah, amen to that. And then also like loving the styles of music and being well versed and going, yeah, this calls for Hofner because of the era that we're going for, and knowing that means moving the pick to a certain area. Like it's all about loving the music enough to do the stuff that lets you execute it, right?
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. When you play live, do you have like a favorite amp that you like to use? You probably have to do with backline a fair bit of the time.
I'm one of those dudes who's not super particular about his amp. I have a few amps that I'm not a huge fan of. I like having it sound nice behind me. I'm fine with an Ampeg. That's pretty standard on backline. If I get to use Orange, I'm really stoked because they always sound good. Not a huge fan of the GK stuff, which gets provided a lot. Always struggling to dial in a tone I love. But for me, it's more that amp is essentially a monitor for me.
Right.
Especially how I tend to run my gear live with most of like the country projects I work with, or with Mother, or even with like my metal band Third Ion. it's all DI off my pedal board. That's what goes to front of house. So they're not taking a mic off the amp. They may be as a safety, but my main tone comes off just straight DI out of the bass.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one because you know, I think we're in a place where in-ear monitors for touring are the big thing, and less amps on stage, but also there's always that conversation. At least this has been my experience with the conversation with the sound man about, okay, we're taking a DI right off the bass, you know, not the pedals, not miking the amp, and you always kind of have to negotiate that if they trust you and they like, okay, that signal will be fine.
Yeah.
Versus when sometimes they just want to have it as simple as possible. And I always try and make peace, you know, and okay, this person's going to be responsible for the sound that I put out to the audience. So trying to be too hard line about it. But so is that something you find you have to kind of negotiate and go, well, the sound off my board's going to be good. Trust me, you know?
Yeah, sometimes. It really depends who it is. We've worked with the same front of house guy with Mother for quite a while, and he's really great. He knows what we're doing. He actually is a very modern sound man, so he gets the vibe. Actually, we did a European tour where we had no amps on stage. We were playing smaller venues, and we wanted to have more room to move, more room for like a bit of production. You know, Molly and Jasmine have keyboards, so it takes up a lot of space on stage. So we ditched bass and guitar amps. I went right out of my pedal board to front of house and just had ears. And Ryan went right out of a Kemper. Same thing, all just ears. And it was great. You know, I missed a little bit of the air pushing behind me from the amp, but I don't feel like my playing suffered. It's one of those things, it's sort of the modern world of playing live. And you just learn to do it well and roll with it. And you can still play the same way. That's what I find.
Yeah, and I think having good gear, right, having good in-ears makes a huge difference, and a really dedicated sound person as well.
Yeah, if it's a sound person I haven't worked with before, sometimes they'll want to, you know, use the DI from the back of the intake head or whatever, and sort of like, hey, let's try my pedal board instead. And usually I go, oh, okay, great. Actually, the pedal board sounds really good.
Yeah,
I made sure that it's like a clean setup. It's got a JDI on the back end, so it's a nice transformer. It's a nice signal in front of house.
And so in your pedal board, you mentioned having an Octaver. We may as well go through some of the stuff you use. I know you have some drive sounds and some dirt sounds in there.
I do. I have a variety of things that for me work as a really good toolkit. It took a while to get. I think everybody who's got like a pedal board that they love, it's not the first iteration. It's the 6th or 7th, or you know, the rest of my pedals are on a tray behind me. So what I have is I actually have a compressor, a diamond, that I run into. I often have a volume pedal right here, but I'm a little hard on it live and I broke it. So new one needs to go there. But yeah, I run into this, and then this runs right into this loop switcher at the bottom, this one control. And so what I have is I have it set up to be essentially different patches for each group that I work with. Mother is the first 2 banks of patches. And so what I have is you know, clean, and then I have different drive sections. So I've got the Dark Glass B7K, which I use as like a amp sound. I've got the Dark Glass X7, which I use as like my rocket ship crazy distortion. And then for me, I go right to the Octave and the B7K, and then Octave and the X7. So I use those quite a bit, actually. I use them with Mother. I use them with the country project sometimes. For covering a hip hop tune or something like that, I'll go to the Octave pedal. It just sounds dope. Has a bit of variation between the bass just doesn't sound the same the whole set. All of a sudden you get this new sound. Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, and on a big stage, when you hit that Octaver, I mean, it goes through the subs, and it's almost like a physical experience when that gets kicked in, right?
Crushing, yeah. I use it. What I'll do sometimes, like with the Mother tunes, I'll play the chorus, or sorry, verses. It's just like a bit of grit, and then I'll pop over to like octave and huge grit for like a chorus. Just go gnarly, just ram it huge. And so what I also have on here is I've got this little envelope filter. I have the source audio one that I love, but the footprint is huge. So I swapped it out for that guy there, the MXR. And then what I also have is
I've picked up one of those as well, the MXR. That's great fun. I found the sensitivity setting was really tweaky, and I had to get it exactly right.
it took a little bit of playing. What I liked about that source audio one is it was just like I pulled up the presets, like, oh, these are great, and they have a whole EQ setting on it, so you can really pull out that quack that sometimes you don't want. So that, yeah, but this I don't use it as often. Mother, it's a little bit effecty thing, but when I'm playing Guilt and Code with like the drum and bass projects or whatever, I do a few things there, hip hop or drum and bass projects. I use that quite a bit, just getting early. And then I actually use these two pedals quite a bit. They're both Strymon. It's the Flint is trem and verb, and I think it's intended typically for guitar players who don't know what they're getting in backline, so they can have their Fender sound, their Vibro King, Vibrolux sound, or whatever. But I love the reverb on it. It's absolutely crushing. I initially got it when I was playing upright, NS upright, like electric upright, and bowing, so that it would have a bit of space. It wasn't so dry. And I just found that this, combined with the delay, the timeline, which is also crushing, really allowed me to do some spatial stuff, to add to the ambience of certain sections where you just can't do that with just standard bass.
I love it. And, the way you talk about it as well as hitting the pedal for the chorus versus what you played on the verse, you're really, you're adding a layer of production, which is what you also do when you play the gig, and you're producing yourself a sound that fits the song, right?
Yeah, I find that certain gigs, I have a little pedalboard too, which is just a compressor and a tuner and an octave pedal. And that's it. And actually for a lot of local gigs, a lot of smaller stuff, even the country stuff, that's all I'll take. I don't need this big fancy group switching system. But for something like Mother, having that variety of sounds just makes the set really intriguing. Yeah. It's not just bass the whole time. You're able to do a lot of different things, create a palette of sounds, which feels so creative and fun. I mean, if you're doing a 90-minute set, it's so exciting to be able to add that much variation in it.
Yeah, and I think it's fun from an audience perspective as well. They get that, produced quality where the player's not just kind of phoning it in, but they're playing parts they've crafted. With extended techniques and extended effects. I remember there's a part where you play the Moog synth as well, and that it almost changed the band into a different band.
Yeah, I've always loved synths. They're just so fun. I have a variety of them kicking around here. Some Novation stuff. I've got the Bass Station 2, which is if I'm doing a hip hop gig, I take the Bass Station for sure, because the low end on it is crazy.
Yeah,
it's just the presets are awesome. Yeah, it's really easy to make your own sounds on it. It's super dope.
And you have a piano background, so you have no problem with the technique, right? So
yeah, there was a long time where I didn't play piano. I got disenfranchised with it, and I focused so much on bass. And then a friend of mine, I remember years ago, said we did a cover gig. Actually, with Catherine Hiltz. She was playing bass, and they were like, "Oh, you have keyboards. You want to play like keys on this cover gig?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Like thinking like this will be no problem, and then being like, "Oh, I have to make all these sounds and like not just playing piano. It's keys," and it got me back into the world of what is a piano, what is a Rhodes, what is an organ, what is a Juno, what is this basic, these different textures and techniques. And all play a little differently.
Yeah, and all those sounds have their own treatments as well. You want different reverb for the Rhodes and maybe a different delay for like a DX kind of sound. So the programming time is intense. Like we think we're being geeky when we have an Octaver.
Yeah. A keys gig is always like, they're like, "Hey, can you learn these 30 songs on keys?" Oh, it's so much work to like get all the sounds right. So like, "Can you learn these 30 songs on bass?" You're just like, "Oh, that's a lot of charts." It's a different vibe. But yeah, it's I find it enjoyable to mix that up. You're still, especially with a bass synth, you're still filling the same role.
Yeah.
Still the meat and potatoes. It's still like the bottom end. It just adds a different character, and you really play it in a different way. I always think of like a lot of '80s, like Michael Jackson tunes. Right? Hearing a lot of those old dudes who there was that guy, the session guy who played synth bass.
Yeah.
And he was like just so crushing. So like Man in the Mirror, listening to the synth bass in that song is like shocking how amazing it is.
Yeah, we were listening to Thriller on Saturday. My son loves Michael Jackson, making breakfast, and we got our vinyl fixed up here, so we're checking out our old vinyl records. And yeah, I mean, it's, you know, Louis Johnson and great bass players, but also like I think it was Greg Fillinganes who did a lot of the and stuff. Yeah. And those sort of composite parts that, you know, you can't like there's octaves there.
Most trying to do that octave live is gnarly.
Yeah, right. No, most of us just go like
totally.
Actually, like
yeah. I remember the first time hearing that, kind of like, oh, I'm not doing that right. Like, I have to add the octave, man. That's actually something. That's something I did as a kid before I could afford an octave pedal. I just had, you know, a crappy little 4-string bass in my bedroom. 16 years old. I used to do my own fake octaves. So if I heard someone do a part, I would actually do the not points for my pedalboard. I would move the octaves around and just play with, you know, 2 claws essentially.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's how I learned how to play octave pedal.
Right.
Getting one later, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a revelation for me when I got my first octave pedal. I wanted to use it all the time, and you could use the 2 octaves down. So of course I turned that up all the time, 2 octaves down.
Yeah, totally.
And the subs would be going.
Yeah.
It'd be like you just had this new like 5th gear added to your car, right? And
totally.
there's a couple extra cylinders added to the engine, right? It's just
crushing the low end of the song. Can't hear the kick drum anymore. Like, yeah.
Yeah, good
fun. I actually was really intrigued by that, though. I was always like, I remember going along the Quaid when, I don't know, I was like 19, 18 or something. Do they make an octave up pedal? And the guy was like, I don't think so. I've never heard of that. And then along came the Pog.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, I had a Pog in my pedalboard. I still have a couple at the studio here. And they just sound so cool on a bass. You still, I find that you can still play your regular wheelhouse instead of having to play the octave up, you know, like playing Sledgehammer or something like that. You're playing up. You play where you normally would, but you get that sense of octaves.
Yeah.
And I find that really intriguing. And instead of that lower thick octave, it's a thinner one because it goes higher. And something about that sound is really cool too. Like they both feel thin.
Yeah, and with your board, I can see where you could get some of those like Royal Blood kind of sounds where you've got, it sounds like a guitar and then you kick the bass in. Meanwhile, you're actually playing the bass the whole time, and the bass comes as a surprise. You know, it's been like, what was that guitar part? It was sort of one note at a time, but, you know, distortion and stuff, and then suddenly it's octaves together.
Yeah.
I could see that totally working with your setup that you've got there. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I started a quarantine jams project with a couple of buddies of mine, Johnny Andrews on drums, and Johnny Tobin on keys, and a bunch of the tunes I've just been writing these bass parts and then sending them to them. Here, play on this. And I just thought, I'll just do the guitar parts on the bass. So I've essentially been doing that. I've been running through a guitar amp behind me and using like a Pog and a bunch of guitar pedals and just making the bass a guitar.
Yeah, why not?
A different voice.
That's cool. You play guitar as well too, don't you?
Yeah. I'm not by any means a great guitar player. It's just feels different. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know. It's just like it's fine. I like it. I'll do it if I need to play it on a session or something, but it doesn't feel the same as this. This feels like home.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, I always felt like guitar. I've tried so many times, and I built about I think I built about 15 guitars over the time I was building. And I always thought, okay, I'll build one for me, and I'd play it for like a month and sell it, because it just wouldn't stay. It's too small.
Yeah.
There's that third in the tuning. Like, why is there a third?
I don't even want to talk about that.
Yeah, right. And then, and then you gotta buy amps, and you know, you got to get the pick together. And it was like, no, okay. So for me, I found the 6-string bass was just like playing this with an extra string, and I could relate in fourths. And you know, I took some lessons with Todd Johnson, who's a great jazz. He's basically like Joe Pass on a 6-string bass.
Right.
He showed me these voicings and stuff, and I found it really useful. Although I don't do much of it anymore. It's just not where my ear's at. But yeah, it was like doing the guitar function with the bass, and why not? You know, those guys can come into our range by tuning down. Well, let's take some of their territory and play voicings, right?
Yeah, I've always been intrigued by that. I really like guitar voicings on the bass, or keys voicings on the bass.
Yeah.
It just the instrument itself sounds so different. It sort of dictates, even if it's the same chord or the same voicing as that other instrument, it dictates something different. You feel different about it. It creates a different type of space.
Yeah, for sure. And the longer strings and the tuning and all of that. And plus the fact that the guy who's doing it, or guy or woman or in between, who's playing it, you know, they're going to be out of their comfort zone. So for the player, you're doing something like, you know, wow, that's so weird to us. We're used to like,
yeah.
So there's a whole attitude part to that where you know, the difficulty of pulling it off makes it special too for the player and for the listener. You know, like when we talked about Jocko before, and nobody'd ever heard that stuff. So
yeah, that those high notes, those interesting notes, those extended techniques, they really call something up. Oh, like that was weird, or that was really intriguing, or sometimes, yeah, that was really beautiful. I remember hearing Michael Manring as a kid.
Yeah,
I have never heard a bass sound like this. That one tune where he's got that hyper bass, that crazy with all the hip shots on it. It's like, how is he playing this? And then seeing him do it like on a YouTube video where he's switching all of the tunings as he's playing. Wow, this is fascinating. This is a really unique approach to this instrument.
Yeah, that's somebody with way too much time on their hands.
Yeah. Actually, he guested on the Terror Syndrome record that I did with Ryan, with RVP. We had two bass guests. We had Manring, and we had Trevor Dunn from Mr. Bungle.
Wow.
Which was crushing. And because I knew the most about recording stuff, I was talking to these guys. So Michael Manring sends me an email with his bass track in it. I put it in the song. It's just like, whoa, oh my God. Same thing, I got an email from Trevor Dunn, like, hey, like, what's the best way to mic up a bass rig at home? I was just like, you're asking me? You're like, okay. Wow. And then what he sent was so crushing. I was like, oh man, you should play bass in the full record. It's just ridiculous.
Oh, that's fantastic. What's the project called again?
That was called Terror Syndrome. I'm not even sure where you would find that. Maybe it's on Spotify or Apple Music.
Yeah.
We did it years ago with it was my brother and myself and Ryan Mollerup from the Devon Towns Project. He now plays with I'm Monolith.
Oh, cool.
Another heavy band.
Yeah, you mentioned before doing this quarantine tunes thing. I've seen lots of my friends doing that, and I've enjoyed your videos as well. Yeah, and real like fusion-y stuff, and I'm like, yeah, that's a really cool wheelhouse to be in. I was wondering, you know, in all these videos, since we're doing this, well, we'd be talking in person, drinking coffee, you know, but you know, this is a special time. Do you have any tips to give people that might be watching on how you're getting through, you know, besides making projects and posting them? Is there some other things you're doing to keep your head above water during the quarantine times?
It's funny. I've ended up talking to a lot of my musician friends more than I used to. Just like, hey, how are you feeling about this not gigging thing? Oh, it's weird. And just like, you just talking about it's like, hey, I'm gonna call my buddy. Even I would call him once every month or so. Now I call him like once a week.
Yeah, because we're not seeing each other on gigs. I'm doing this rehearsal band with John Corser, who's a friend of mine, and it's 8 brass players, and I'm the sole bass player. But just getting to see people that we're used to working with all the time, it's even though it's infrequent, it's nice. And you're exactly right. There's a gap in the community part of this. So filling that, with hanging out more online is probably the thing, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to plug that pedalboard back in here. I actually got fairly intrigued by Bach again. I think for those of us that like classical music, we sort of go back to those kinds of things. You're listening, to things and some modern music and some of this, and all of a sudden you hear that that classical piece. And oh yeah, all this stuff is coming from there, and I'm so intrigued by this, and the harmony is amazing, and that string, the violin part is crazy. And so I think it's the violin concerto made it #1 in A minor, and I just started shedding the violin part on bass, because it was intriguing me. I was like, this is a good time to approach something vastly different than I would normally do.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, so shedding more. I've kind of done the opposite. I've not been playing as much, and my hands are suffering a little bit. But doing more of this kind of thing has been a good thing to manage. And I feel like now that I'm, through a lot of these interviews, I'm going to get back to practicing as well. And I see some of my method books sitting there right next to me, going, "Hey, get back at it."
Yeah, totally. I have. I'm always working on a project here. Something, creating a tune or whatever it is. I'm not typically shedding in here.
Right.
When I go home, I have just a bunch of basses all over the place. And now that I don't have to learn all these charts all the time or rehearse for this gig or that gig, it's just hey, why don't we play you? And it's been really nice to reconnect for me with my love of the instrument.
Yeah.
What this thing does and how I feel about it. And just taking that time to sort of sit with it.
That is a wonderful place to wrap things up, I think, is all of us take a chance to re-examine your love of the instrument and explore some projects that mean something to you. And maybe we all emerge out of this time as, somebody a little different than we went in the front end of it.
I think that's probably going to happen, but I think if we, support each other and do it right, we'll come out with the new normal being a good new normal.
Thanks so much, Mike. It's really been a pleasure to talk with you today.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you as well.
Yeah, all the best. And we'll post this up fairly soon.
Great. That's awesome.
Thanks, man.